Hi, I'm Colin.
And I'm Phil.
We're the hosts of Science Fiction 101.
It's a show which gets to the heart of science fiction. Books, films, TV. We've covered Star Trek,
Doctor Who,
Star Wars.
We love to explore the past, present, and future of science fiction.
And we'd love for you to join us
on Science Fiction 101.
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Phil.
Here we are again, recording in January 2026, with the holiday season now a dim and distant memory. Hope you all had a good one. Last time we reviewed an old magazine, Asimov science fiction from the 1980s. This time we're reviewing a recent issue of the same magazine, which is going to be Asimov's November-December 2025. So we'll come to that in a moment. We probably won't have time for a quiz today, so we'll carry that over till the next episode. But we will make time for listener comments. We heard from Bob, who said, speaking of the Asimov's magazine, "Man, this is fun reading. George Sithers was my agent for several unsuccessful years." I don't think he's blaming George Sithers there, but it's interesting to know. He says, lots of fun. Do read Blackout/All Clear, and also read the Doomsday Book. These are Connie Willis works, of course.
Yeah.
Which he says are also hinted at in Firewatch. And he refers us to an episode of the Hugo's There podcast, which, of course, we know very well.
Yeah.
And we heard from Damo, who said, I had forgotten that Connie Willis had been writing for so long. Firewatch is such an excellent story. I am not surprised that you found it to be the standout in this issue. Now, Sue experienced a coincidence. She said, the first story that came up in this issue of Asimov's was from the Magipore Chronicles by Robert Silverberg, whose first book in the Magipore series I happen to be rereading as we speak. Bit of a Twilight Zone moment for Sue. Linda enjoyed the mention of Silverberg. She said, you had me at Magipore. My son and I listened during one of our Christmas crafting sessions. I'm convinced that the labyrinth on Magipore was inspired by some pre-Columbian ruins in coastal Peru.
Interesting.
Interesting indeed. And Sue also provides us with another example to add to the time travel trope, which we spotted last time. She says, Jodie Taylor's wonderful Chronicles of St. Mary's series also takes serious note of the he, she, it was going to die anyway, so doesn't have a future point. And Joe said, the first two seasons of For All Mankind are excellent. It gets a bit soap opera-y after that. And yes, it does. I'm still on series 4. More on that later. Oh, and very finally, we heard from Pete, who commented, it really pulled me up short that you guys seem to regard 1982 as old-timey science fiction. It's just me, of course. I'm old, he says. And then he says, after the mid-60s, that's the decade of the mid-60s, I think, not his mid-60s. After the mid-60s, the best, and I stress best, works of any year are as modern as anything published in the 2020s. Matters of technological furniture aside, of course. And I think I tend to go along with that. I tend to find anything from about 1965 onwards feels fairly modern, but it tends to be the technological furniture that gets in the way.
The cell phone, the car, the way you fly, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, or the absence of those things. If you'd like to comment on anything we talk about, you can do so on Blue Sky or Facebook, where you can find us as Science Fiction 101 Podcast, or on our blog, which is at 101sf.blogspot.com.
Let's talk about Asimov's.
The issue we're reading is Asimov's from November-December 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays the magazine is edited by Sheila Williams. And she joined the staff of the magazine back in 1982. And she became the editor in 2004. And she's won the Hugo for Best Editor of Short Form. And recently we learned that she was hospitalised with a brain aneurysm. And so we wish her a speedy recovery. I haven't heard any updates on that.
No.
So the first thing we have in the magazine, apart from a couple of adverts and table of contents, is the editorial from Sheila. which I don't think we need to go into.
No.
And then we come to Reflections, the Robert Silverberg column. Now, Silverberg is 91 years old, and I don't wish in any way to sound ageist, because I'm genuinely not. But I am going to mention ages a few times during this episode because I think there's a thread running here. And in this column, he tells of a stunt issue of Astounding from 1949. Did you read this, Colin?
I did. I was tickled to see that when we read the 1982 issue of Asimov's, that there was a Robert Silverberg story, and here we are 40 odd years later reading a Robert Silverberg essay in the same magazine.
Yeah, so he's still there. It's fantastic. So in this column, he refers back to a spoof letter that somebody sent into Astounding in 1948, where they reviewed a fictitious future issue of Astounding, and they listed all the stories and authors that they'd read or hadn't read, because this was a spoof. But the editor, John W. Campbell Jr., thought this was such an interesting idea that he actually created that issue. I think with one exception, he got all the authors named to write stories with those very titles that the reader had sent in.
Mm-hmm.
And they published that issue the following year. And the guy who wrote the letter was astounded that this had happened. I'd like to see more of that in today's magazines, I think. Then we get to On the Net by James Patrick Kelly, which is another non-fiction article which gives a kind of a potted history of Asimov's and its cover design over the years. Then we start getting to fictional stuff. I can't remember what page we're on now. We get to a poem. And like last time, Colin, if you're okay, I'm happy to skip the poems.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then we get Because It's There by Susan Schwartz.
So Susan Schwartz was born in 1949. She was first published in 1980. She's had multiple Nebula nominations and a Hugo nomination. This story reminds me of the story The Heart of the Comet by Gregory Benford, and I should have written this down because I've forgotten his co-author. There's a lost human colony that has landed on a planet, and the planet is extremely cold, and they don't have a lot of resources, and they're just barely surviving, and two incredible things happen. A ship crashes on the mountain above the colony, and then a while later, another ship shows up to try and reach that ship on the mountain, and the stranded colonists are hoping that they will be rescued or perhaps given some kind of resources to make their lives easier on the planet.
And it's kind of a mixture, in a way, of planetary exploration and an Everest expedition. I mean, it's sort of inspired by mountaineering because you've got things like Sherpas and porters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like reading an old-time adventure story on a mountain, except it happens to be on a planet.
Yeah. I think there's some interesting cultural diversion that happens because this little colony is all by itself and survival is so difficult. They begin to spin off into their own little culture to where you earn pieces of your name. To go from a porter, you get a first name, and then when you're a leader of porters, you get two names, like, Colin Cuskey or Phil Nichols.
Yeah.
And then as you progress up the chain in the culture, in the society, you get more and more pieces added to your name.
Yeah. So the more badass you become, the longer your name becomes.
Funny you should use that phrase. Let's talk about that after we get through and talk about past, present, and future.
Oh, okay.
I enjoyed the story. This is probably niggling, but the title really bothers me.
I've forgotten what the title is. What is it?
Oh, the title is Because It's There.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the standard thing, like, why did you climb it? Why did you do this? Why did you go there? Because it's there.
Yep.
And in this particular case, that isn't the reason they're climbing this mountain. They're climbing this mountain to try and get the information from the ship that crashed on there.
But it made me think that the it, in this case, could be the thing that they're going to look for rather than the mountain itself. But also it just struck me as being ironic because people always do say, well, you only go and climb those things because it's there. And this is saying not always. So I took it as an ironic title.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
I struggle to pinpoint what it is that I object to in the style of this story, but it's something that's common to quite a few stories. And I could only think of it in terms of being exposition by mystery. So in order to tell the story, the writer has to convey a large amount of information, which is the exposition. And of course, we normally say, oh, don't give an exposition dump.
Right.
Spread the exposition out through the story. And one technique for doing that is by having a mystery, which is sort of resolved piece by piece as new pieces of information come in. And I feel that this story is doing this, but it's not just doing it through a mystery that the protagonist has to solve. It's also throwing out information that we as the reader cannot possibly know the meaning of until a bit later in the story. So it's kind of doling out little mysteries. And by about the third reference to a thing, we begin to piece the clues together and have an understanding of the thing. And I personally find that quite annoying. I'd rather, if you're going to have exposition, be more direct about it. And don't create a mystery for the reader that isn't there for the characters.
No, I understand what you're talking about. I hadn't really noticed that because I think all the mysteries, all the things that we're supposed to understand about the culture and the plot do get resolved at the end.
Yes.
And as I think about the way you described it, it seems very realistic.
Yeah.
A long time ago, my wife spent a year overseas in Germany, and she would keep notes all through the day of words that were used that she didn't know the meaning of, and she would go home and look it up so she could, continue to develop her German because she was taking classes. It was, cultural immersion.
Yeah.
And this seems to be kind of like that.
Yes.
Like if they never resolve the mystery, that would bother me.
Oh, absolutely right. It is like that, and it is therefore quite realistic. I personally sometimes feel in a story that it is pure artifice and is just a mechanism for controlling the information that you're giving to the reader, whereas I would rather the writer just tell me the story. Now, some of these stories I read before Christmas, so we're talking about, over a month ago now. So I am dependent entirely on my notes, and I don't know if they're going to make any sense to me. I hope so. The next story we've got is Within God by Garrett Ashley, who is an author who's been publishing short fiction since 2010, so one of the younger authors in this issue. He is also a creative writing lecturer, and what goes on in this story is that Earth is apparently in its death throes, and there are colonies up in orbit, some of which are penal colonies, and there's a large thing up there, variously referred to as Lucy, and also referred to as Leviathan. Our hero in the story is a convict who has been sentenced to labour within Lucy, and from what we can gather, he and dozens of others are working to keep Lucy alive, protecting her from parasites and hardening of the arteries and things like that. And this reminded me a bit of Fantastic Voyage, the film where people are shrunk down so that they can go inside a man's body and fix some problem. Now, Lucy is an alien life form of some kind and is immensely old. And Lucy is also viewed by the people down on Earth as God. This is where my memory goes a bit vague. I've got a note on the plot here. I've written, the plot has our hero in a relationship with a female convict who is part of a plot to kill Lucy. Can you pick it up from there? Because I don't remember.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing to think about because when I think about keeping something alive, I tend to think of doctors and nurses who live under the edict of do no harm. These are prisoners who are trapped inside of this thing. It's being used to control the population of the Earth, and they don't want to be there. His girlfriend wants him to talk to one of the shuttle pilots who he buys drugs from to get something they can use to poison Lucy so they can begin to kill it, and then they would all be released from their, inner Lucy servitude.
Yes. I think the thing that I didn't get is who is doing this controlling? Is it that this Lucy has arrived and Lucy is seeking to control people on the Earth? Or is it that somebody is using Lucy for that control purpose?
It's the government pointing to Lucy and say, look, there is God. God, you can see it. If I remember right, they discourage people from pointing telescopes at Lucy because they might see ships docking at her and doing other kinds of things.
Yes. Now, I don't know whether we should do spoilers, but okay, we've got to do a spoiler. I mean, essentially, Lucy is destroyed or killed or dies, and it sort of brings confusion and chaos on the Earth. And I thought this was interesting because it's sort of a science fiction story with what we call a big dumb object. I mean, this is like Rendezvous with Rama, where a huge spaceship comes in from nowhere. We've no idea what it is, where it's from, what it's for. But it's also taking the awe and mystery of that and converting it into religious awe and mystery. And I quite like that as a device in a story. But I think I wanted to like it more than I actually did, if that makes sense.
When you read something, you want to give it half a chance. Yeah, I think that totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. What did you think?
I was not really impressed by this story. I found our protagonist difficult to like because they're kind of an anti hero.
Yes.
My first thought was I should think of them as Andy Dufresne from the Shawshank Redemption. You know, they're
Yes.
imprisoned unjustly. It's like, no, they're justly prisoned and
Yes.
they're still breaking laws by using drugs inside of Lucy.
Yes.
And so instead of, trying to be rehabilitated, they're trying to break out. And there's a subplot about his girlfriend getting pregnant, which is
Yeah.
something she uses as leverage over him to get him to
Yeah.
go and get what they need to kill Lucy. And yeah,
A little bit overcomplicated, I think, for what it was, but an appealing setup.
yeah, yeah. I just found it hard to like the people in the story.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next one,
Yes.
which is Lagrange Point 5 by Sean McMullen, who is Australian,
Hmm.
77 years old. And Lagrange Point 5, I thought immediately, oh, this is old school hard science fiction. We're on a mission to the L5 point near, but not very near, to Mars, where we're investigating. There's sort of two lumps of rock there that are believed to have been flung off Mars about 4 billion years ago. I'm assuming listeners know what Lagrange points are. I think I have an understanding of what they are. I think they're sort of points of gravitational stability. When you've got like a sun and a planet, there will be a third point in that system where the gravitational forces of the sun and the planet balance each other out. So you will get objects, debris, bits of asteroid, a meteor will sort of gather at this gravitational minimum.
Minimum.
So the L5 point is one of these points of stability where they expect something to gather and something has gathered. So it's an intriguing setup. And then on top of that, there's a mysterious ALF zone, so called, within which no electrical equipment works. So the minute you read that in a story, you think, oh, that's going to be significant later on. The actual story itself, we have the captain who goes down in a sort of a shuttle thing and undergoes some odd behaviour. He shouts out, Samson, 3 times. And they don't know, well, what's he on about? What's going on? And then they examine why he would behave that way. They come to a realization that he must have been sending a coded message back to base. And they realize people on Earth are going to blow the ship up remotely to destroy this thing sitting at the L5 point. And then there's this sort of mad rush to try and stop that happening. So it's quite an interesting bit of hard science fiction adventure, but not totally satisfying because I wasn't too happy with the logic of this one.
Curious to hear what your complaint about the logic is, because I also had a logic complaint. One element that you didn't mention is that this is an American mission, it's not an international one.
Right.
And there are other missions from China and Russia trying to get to this L5 Lagrange point around Mars. And the idea that you're going to try and blow it up is a
Yeah.
little disingenuous, because if your bomb does not blow it up, you
Yep.
have just given up your only chance to study it. And
Yep.
then here come the Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah. That is part of my objection to it on logical grounds. But no, the logical objection I have is the inference that they make. They go from the captain's behaving in a strange way. What could explain his behavior? Well, here's an explanation. This explanation must be the only possible explanation. And what's the consequence of that explanation is the people on Earth, our people, are going to set off a bomb. And that's about 4 or 5 steps, each one of which could be incorrect because each one is speculative. And because there's a pressure of time to solve the problem, they don't stop to say, what evidence could we gather that this is or is not the correct interpretation? They instead just say, oh, we're in a panic. We've only got 5 minutes to do this. That was applying false jeopardy when we don't know for certain that they've got the interpretation correct. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm skimming the story to see if I can pick up on anything else that might have said, oh, our weight is off, or we have a radiation detection or something
Yeah.
else, but I am not seeing it. All the discussion is, why did the captain take the shuttle through the elf zone, say the phrase Samson, 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 and then blow his hatch and essentially commit suicide?
And from that, they assume that's a coded message, which seems a reasonable assumption, but there might be other reasons that he did what he did. How would they know that?
There's a very brief mention. It's on at the bottom of page 57.
Okay.
Uh, he wanted to be the hero who saved the world, so we don't matter. There's 1 metric ton of excess mass aboard Wayfarer, that's the ship that went on this mission, that
Yes.
Mission Control keeps trying to laugh off. That's about the mass of a bomb big enough to destroy Eureka as well as us.
Right. So again, that's an inference. That doesn't prove that it's a bomb. Could be something else.
If you're going for high tension and excitement, I think that works.
Yes. It's some kind of Hollywood logic, it's what you'd see in a movie, but it's something that on second viewing of the movie you'd say, wait a minute.
Yeah, something just doesn't jive. I mean, wouldn't it be crazy if they got to the other side of the elf zone, which disables the bomb, and then find out they were completely wrong the whole time?
Yeah, that's the story I'd prefer to read.
Or to lay some further foundation to really ground the bomb versus say, oh, it has to be a bomb because we don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. Anyway, it's good fun, I thought.
Yeah. The next story is called Solemnity by Mark D. Jacobson. He was first published in 2012, and that's the only biographical information I could really find about him. This is a pretty deep and rich story. A computer archaeologist goes to a distant planet with a civilization that recently died. The civilization died, not the computer archaeologist.
Yes.
And then as she begins to do her work on there to help decipher the computers that the civilization left behind, she begins having visions. And it's the same kind of visions that the previous computer archaeologist had, and it seemed to drive them insane to that point. And
Yeah.
as the plot progresses, we learn that everyone is experiencing these visions with all kinds of consequences, including a priest who then begins to question his faith. It's kind of hard to get the climax of the story. In the climax of the story, the priest is going to the place on the planet where they think that the god of the planet is dead or dying. They think that the injury to the god, which is causing it to die, caused the civilization to collapse. They're not completely sure about this. And so the archaeologist and her friend, the poet, chase down the priest in an effort to, save his life. And I liked the depth of the story. I thought that the archaeological aspects were interesting and trying to understand this foreign alien culture.
Yeah.
The discussion of faith I enjoyed, but the whole overarching plot just did not work for me.
Right. One thing that's interesting is that the very concept of a software archaeologist, as soon as I saw that phrase, I thought, oh, this is interesting. And of course, what it's about is that this alien culture has left behind its technology. But basically, it's a load of computers and nobody knows how to boot them. Nobody knows how to log in. So they need a software archaeologist to kind of reverse engineer everything that's in there. The thing that I found strange is that the story says, oh, their technology was very similar to ours. They used copper wires, they used LED lighting, their computers used chips just like ours do. And I thought, really? This sounds a bit unlikely to me. But that is incidental. There's nothing in the story that requires that to have been the case. But the story simply says this is how it was. But that enables our software archaeologists to apply their knowledge of statistical distributions and large language models and all of that to figure out the meaning within the stuff stored on these alien computers. And that moment when they're sort of running a routine and out of the randomness or the apparent randomness, suddenly a message emerges or a piece of coherent text emerges. I thought that was a really nice moment.
That was actually one of the things that really threw me off.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, my history is I was an electrical engineer and a chip designer.
Right.
And so there are certain fundamental things about electronics that don't change based on what planet that you're on.
Right.
One of which is that magnetic media is not guaranteed to survive 3,000 years.
Right.
And Electronic memory is also not guaranteed to last 3,000 years. You might find some discs, some of the old stamped or laser etched discs, they
Yeah.
might last 3,000 years,
Yeah.
unless they were the rewritable kind, because the ink degrades over time.
Mm.
And so I just thought it was crazy why you would deliberately inject information into a story which would make it highly unlikely that any of the information survived 3,000 years.
Yeah, good point.
Just don't mention it. The degree of their technology, just say that I'm here to work on it and I'll. It's probably not something most people would pick up on.
I didn't. I mean, I picked up on the weirdness of it, but I didn't really articulate it the way you did, which is very clear. The thing that I always find a bit suspect in science fiction stories like this is, why are people sending priests into space on these sort of archaeological missions? You know, when you go and dig up Egyptian remains, you don't normally send a priest. You normally send an expert in Egyptology. And then there's the discussion of, oh, is this a super intelligence, as in an alien, or is it really a god? And at no point does anyone stop to say, how would we know if it is a god? How do you define a god? And of course, the concept of a god is usually unknowable. And nobody seems to say that. It's getting into theological issues, but without actually addressing them in a philosophical way.
Yeah, like I mentioned, there are discussions about people that struggle with faith, people who are brought up in extremely religiously and morally conservative families and communities. In fact, the archaeologists came from a cult.
Yes, that's right.
And how they escaped that, and then you were able to develop their own lives. And then I find it almost ironic that they're injected into a situation where they have to confront the fact that there may be a god, although it's nothing like, in our societies, the gods we believe in are supernatural.
Yes.
In this alien culture, these people may have been designed to electrically interface with their god.
Yeah.
There's the talk about, oh, they have special nerve endings which were organic and broke down over time, so we didn't understand it from looking at their remains, but it's all documented in their medical and scientific books.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a bad story. It's just...
No. A little bit strange. Shall we go on to the next one?
Yes.
Which is Can You Outrun a T-Rex? By Sean Monaghan, who is from New Zealand and has been publishing short fiction since 2008 and publishing novels since 2012. And he's a very prolific author. If you go on ISFDB and look him up, dozens and dozens of stories listed. And this story, I thought, was just a good, clean, fun story about time travel. Our hero has to go back to the days of dinosaurs to retrieve a missing friend, so somebody who's been sent back previously. And he goes back with a little cohort. And in my notes, I put excellent opening line. Now, I can't remember what the opening line is, so I'm going to have to look it up now.
Yeah. Back in the day, when I was house sharing with Brendan, he would come home with like 40 bananas.
It kind of sets up a situation, and it immediately gave me a feeling of what the tone of this story might be. Either an outright comedy or something that's at least quite loose in its storytelling. And I think both of those turn out to be true. It's fairly straightforward. It's go back in time, rescue the person and bring them back. And there are little complications there around, well, how do you get back? What happens if the machine that you depend on to get back isn't working? And then the solution to the problem is that, people don't only have one shot at rescuing you from time, because if they come back and they're not able to rescue you the first time, they can just do it again. So I think they make one attempt to rescue our hero, which is unsuccessful, and then it's supposedly a number of years later they make another attempt, which is successful. But from his point of view, it's just a very short period of time that passes. So none of this is new. We've seen all of this before, but it's a good, fun piece, and I thought it was a very decent piece of writing. But ultimately, it's no Jurassic Park. It's no A Sound of Thunder. I mean, it's probably better than the movie of A Sound of Thunder, but it's not in the same league as the short story A Sound of Thunder. But it's okay. No. It's a good, humorous, light piece of fiction and very clearly written.
It's the first piece of time travel fiction or time loop fiction that I've read where it's told from the perspective of the person inside the loop. Often it's told from the person that has a memory from loop to loop, or from somebody outside who keeps trying to go in to do something and fails and keeps trying and trying and trying. Yeah, so this is all told from Rob's position, where he's the person that's trying to be rescued, and he all these odd things keep happening. In fact, toward the end, Clea shows up and says, "Don't die again," which is something I only picked up on really the second time I read it, which is ironic for a time loop story, right? But this whole idea that yes, that for 3 years they have been trying to rescue him because they had gone back in time to try and rescue Brendan, his roommate with the bananas, and yeah, I liked the humor in this story, which is a challenge for me because I don't tend to get a lot of humor from stories by reading them. But this whole idea about how frustrated they were with their roommate because he bought bananas, and then it turns out that in the intervening 3 years, every time they would make an attempt to rescue Rob, Brendan would bake a cake. And I was assuming it was banana cake.
I might be stretching it a bit, but I think it's a gag, but I think it also has a thematic link to what the story is about. So what seems like stupid behaviour actually is quite clever behaviour, because you get two uses out of your bananas. You get to eat them, and any you don't eat, you get to have a nice cake. And that is kind of related to the timey-wimey stuff that goes on later on. That you might think that you're in this bind because of the way things are. But no, there's another way of dealing with things.
Yeah. I also particularly enjoyed the fact that these four roommates who are complaining about Brendan's bananas are also all lab mates.
Yes.
And it talks about the change in their group where they go from nitpicking one another and poking jokes and maybe having a relationship to being completely professional when they're in the lab. And their supervising professor is a little frugal. Things are fairly cheap, right? It talks about they were getting paid a few shekels. I think out of any story in the entire magazine, I enjoyed this one the most.
It's a little trifle. It's a bit like a banana cake, really.
It's like having a 4 o'clock tea. You don't want anything too heavy, but you really want to enjoy your meal. It's a nice little break from what's going on.
Yeah. Should we move on?
Is the next one Miracle by Tegan Moore? I have to confess, I did not understand the point of this story.
And you know what? Nor did I.
Oh, okay. Well, let me do my best summary, and then let's go where we can.
Okay.
Three friends are having a spa vacation before one of their weddings, and the bride is what you would call a bridezilla.
Yes.
She's very domineering. She's a bully, and the other people are just kind of going along. And then while they're at this spa retreat, the people in charge are telling them what they're going to do, and it's very Robert F. Kennedy Jr. when it comes to like medical accuracy and healthiness.
Oh my goodness, yes.
As time goes by, the global computer systems break down and they can't afford to make payments anymore. And one of our main character is willing to trade something she has, and I don't even remember what it was, in order to get these substances that they're taking at the spa in order to become better, like to lose weight or improve their skin or do other things. And then she eventually becomes like deified in an alcove in a temple in the middle of the jungle.
That all sounds familiar.
Yeah, so I really didn't follow the point of it. That sounds horribly judgmental. It just means that I didn't understand what was going on in the story.
I kind of got thrown out of the story by about the fourth or fifth page, really. It starts with this really quite cinematic description of the character trying to find a Starbucks in this foreign city that's sort of overgrown, and at first you're not sure whether this is some sort of post-apocalyptic place, whether this is some far-flung tropical island. So you're not quite sure, but it's very visual, very descriptive of her search to find this Starbucks. And I found that okay, but a bit overblown. But then there's that business, as you say, of they're not able to pay for anything. Beyond that, all that I got from this story is that it has a load of interaction between the characters which resembles either people on a gap year. I don't know if you have the concept of a gap year in the States, do you?
There are people that take gap years, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So people on a gap year who've gone backpacking in Thailand, that kind of thing. Or a hen party prior to a wedding. And I didn't feel part of this at all. It's one of those stories where it's as if the characters are all talking to each other, but they're not really talking to me, the reader. Yeah. I would love if any of our listeners read this story and likes it and understands it. I'd love for them to write and tell us, because obviously neither of us got the idea of this. Now we come to Mudfoots by Eric Dal Carlo, who's been publishing short fiction since 1990 and novels since 2005. And this is one I read before Christmas, so I don't have a deep memory of this. But Wing Carney, for that is his name, is some kind of bureaucrat who is summoned to the hospital bed of a mudfoot named Camden, who is the victim of an attack on the compromised territories. And Camden says, and this is my attempt to pronounce it, Nikjikov. And we as the reader are left wondering, what is Nikjikov? Camden tells Wing what this is about, and Wing goes off on a mission to the compromised territories. And we learn that the apparently respectable Wing used to be a mudfoot, which is something a bit more disgraceful. And Nikjikov had been the greyer who headed the mudfoot group. And even as I was writing these notes, I remember thinking, what is a mudfoot? What is a greyer? What are the compromised territories? So this is another one of these where terminology is being used deliberately to sort of raise mystery. And it does resolve these. It does explain these things. But I again found this not terribly interesting. And the storytelling overall, the narration of the story, reads like something from a Humphrey Bogart movie. And there's even a character called Cellini who sounds like a femme fatale from a film noir. And I've put see top of page 126. So let me go to page 126. Here we go. She had a strong aquiline nose, separating the clear pools of her eyes and the fine brows overarching them, graceful cheekbones, elegant lips, in fact, all facial aspects quite pleasing, small breasts, trim waist, but it was her character that shone through. And that kind of description, the detailing of every little nook and cranny and curve of a person's face, as if that has any relevance to their character, that to me, that feels so 1880. Or at the very latest, it's 1940s. But it just seems so out of place in modern fiction. It just made this feel like a story from a much earlier age. And there's all sorts of other things going on in there which just turned me off completely.
Yeah, I struggled to find what was important in this story, and I think it was this idea of family and community.
Right.
So the Mudfoots are kind of like street kids or post-apocalyptic gangs.
Yeah.
And this alien, Nikjikov, invites them onto his farm where they begin to work to build something instead of just steal or tear things down.
Yeah.
And then as they mature and grow, they all decide they're going to do things. Like Celine is going to go into space. Wing wants her to come with him into the city, and she says she's destined for higher things. And that's kind of a slam on Wing and really saying what she's going to go off and do. Yeah. So Wing eventually goes to the city, builds this life for himself where nobody knows where he's really come from. His whole life is a sham, where he lies about his origins, his non-existent marriage, his non-existent kids. But when it comes time to take care of the people that he had kind of grown up with, he valiantly goes across the compromised lands back to the farm to make sure that Nikjikov is going to be okay. And that's where we get to learn that alien species regenerates, propagates the species almost by shedding layers of skin and becoming a new thing. And then beginning again from the same body. And
I'd completely forgotten all of that, As I say, this is one that I read before Christmas, so it didn't make a very deep impression on me at all.
I did a quick reskim of a lot of these over the last few days, so the details are fresh. I all like you, I started reading this back in December, and I stopped taking notes with the phrase, Celine wasn't merely a piece of ass.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, I remember switching off the tablet that I was reading on. When I got to that line, I thought, I've had enough of this. I remember switching the tablet off and going and making a cup of coffee. I did come back later and read some more, but yeah, I remember that line.
It does read like a piece of 1940s or 50s noir, which is funny that you brought that up.
Yeah, I didn't like it at all, really. It's okay in the way it's constructed, and it's one of those... I sometimes say I didn't like the story, but I quite like the author, and I'd read some more of what they've written. So I would certainly give this author another go with another piece. but I don't like this piece very much. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Now we come to the one that I really have to take a huge back seat on this, because we're coming to a story by Alan M. Steele, and my confession is that I never made the time to read this one. And it's also part two of a two-part story, and I think, Colin, you went and read the first part as well.
I tried to find, there's actually 3 parts. This is part
Oh,
3.
3 parts. Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't take notes as to where the other 2 came from, but I believe they were several years ago.
Yeah.
And so I tried to find it online because this is hard, near-term science fiction. That's one of the things I love the most about reading science fiction, those kinds of stories. And so I wanted to learn about the history of the Lemuria 7, and quickly learned that from Asimov's, you can buy back physical paper issues,
Yeah.
but they won't sell you anything electronic.
Right.
And there's a website where you can buy those, but you have to install their reading app to read them,
Yeah.
which I absolutely hate.
Yeah.
And so I was really disappointed, figuring out I would never ever get the full history of the Lemuria 7. This story does kind of wrap up, and it's designed well enough that you can read it standalone.
Right.
But yeah, I want to know all the details for the earlier 2 missions.
Yeah.
And Mr. Steele has mentioned on his social media and website that his plan is to release all 3 pieces as a novel probably later in 2026.
Oh, well, there you go. That'll be your chance to see the whole thing.
Yeah, so Alan M. Steele, was born in 1958, first published in 1988, has 3 Hugo Awards, 2 Locus Awards, and 3 Asimov's Reader Awards.
Mm-hmm.
The backstory behind this, because we're really reading the third in a series of 3, is years ago, people noticed, and people have been noticing, and this is a real thing, there's a situation called TLP, transient lunar phenomena, and it's unexplained lights or shadows on the moon that shouldn't be there. But a private ship is going to explore some of these TLPs, and the entire ship and its crew vanishes. And because of this, that catches the attention of the Earth. There's a joint DARPA Space Force mission, which goes to see what's going on, what happened to the Lemuria, and what's going on the moon. That whole mission disappears with 6 remotely controlled rovers. And so then we come up to current time, and we learn that Amanda from the original Lemuria 7 crew shows up in China. She doesn't remember how she got there, and she has this deep, deep fear of anybody going to the moon again. And so because of the loss of the expeditions, they all decide, from a planetary standpoint, they're not going to explore the moon. There's something on it. They think it's aliens because things people have said in passing before they disappeared. But the resources people wanted from the moon, they're now going to try and get from the asteroid belt. And on a mission to the asteroid belt, they find the Lemuria 7 orbiting the planetoid Vesta. And so they send an expedition to go there with Amanda, and they find the rest of the crew, minus 1 person, and a bunch of log messages. And the messages say that aliens have been watching the Earth from the moon for a long time, and they do that because intelligent life is rare. We developed much more quickly than they anticipated, so they weren't quite ready for us to start exploring the moon the way that we did. But now they're going to withdraw from the moon and let everything kind of go back to normal.
Shades of 2001 here.
In a way, yes. There's a little bit of hand-wavium, because, the aliens are somewhat telepathic, and they can implant memories and thoughts, which is how the logs are created. They put all the rest of the crew, aside from Amanda's boyfriend, into stasis, and they inject these thoughts into him that he then transcribes, and then they put him in stasis too. It's fun. I enjoyed it. I stumbled over something because I didn't write down the meaning of an acronym, and it's Jackass.
Okay.
And it is the Joint America and China Astronomical Survey. And there's a discussion about how they came up with this name and then later on realized how you pronounce the acronym, and then decided just to go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. So now I think I'm going to say a thing about age now, because as I say, I didn't read this story because I was short of time, and I thought this is one of the longer pieces, so I deprioritized it and never made time to read it. I did meet Alan Steele in an online book group once, and he's very interesting and very good to talk to, and he's very down to earth about what his fiction does and how it works and so on. And I have read a couple of pieces of his before. You gave his date of birth earlier. I think I worked out he's 68 years old.
Hmm.
And as I was saying earlier, I'm not drawing attention to people's age to be ageist, but I just wanted to make a point because I noticed that there are quite a few older writers writing for Asimov's. We don't always know how old an author is because their bio doesn't always tell us, but quite often we can infer how old they are from when they first published. But with Asimov's, the first few pieces in there were by authors who are really quite vintage. You know, people in their 70s. You've got Silverberg, who's only a columnist, admittedly, but he's in his 90s. You've got Alan Steele, 68. There's somebody else who's in their 70s. So it just seems a very much older demographic of the writers in this magazine. It perhaps relates to the fact that a lot of these stories are sort of traditional science fiction. There are very few fantasy stories here. They're mostly hard science fiction.
I'd say you're just about right. I mean, some of the science fiction stories are very fantastic, like
Yes.
Miracle. There's a lot of fantasy in that.
Yeah.
The Solemnity piece, there's a lot of fantasy in that as well. And I think those do tend to be by the younger writers.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Jacobson and Tegan Moore were both first published in 2012 or 2015.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you got anything else to say on Lemuria 7, or shall we move on?
Now let's move on.
So that brings us to Catch a Tiger in the Snow by Ray Naylor, who is 49 years old.
Mhm.
Been publishing since 2015, I think, and he's Canadian-American. And I made a note to myself that the theme of this story is, well, one theme of the story is that forgetting is a growth industry. And it's about a man who meets a woman who helps people forget. So if you've got something bad that you need to forget, there are people you can go to and they can selectively remove things from your memory. But they have to very carefully tailor what they take out and put something back in. Because if they just take something out, you'd have this gap and it would be a kind of an existential crisis for you that you couldn't quite access that particular memory. So they have to create almost false memories to fit in and to fill the gap or to smooth the edges of the gap in there. And all of this is quite nicely described in dialogue as she explains to him what she does and what similar people do. She also says that they need to keep a backup. So if they take a memory away from you, they need to keep it for 10 years, just in case anything goes wrong and you need that memory back. So quite how they do this, I don't know. This is more hand-wavium going on here. The story itself is about the relationship that develops between these two characters. I would describe it as a meditation on what memory is, or what memories are for, and what memories do. And as you read the story, or at least as I read the story, I began to realise that he must have had his memory doctored, but he doesn't tell us that he has, or how, or why, or when. But you begin to realise, well, he wouldn't be telling us this story if he hadn't undergone this procedure himself. So as I'm reading, I'm kind of looking for evidence that that has happened. And, well, to say any more, I think would spoil the story. So this is one where I think we shouldn't have a spoiler. I think people should read it because I think it's quite a nice treatment of that idea. But I thought this one was beautifully written. It's very conversational. It's almost like somebody doing a stand-up routine. And there are actually some nice gags in there. So a really nice idea about how to get free sunglasses. But it's also philosophical without getting pompous. And it's humorous. So I really like this piece. I didn't 100% understand it on first reading, but I did feel the desire to go back and read it again. So I actually reread it very quickly. It's a very short piece.
Mm.
So I think maybe 5-10 pages. But yeah, I love this one.
Like you, I did a lot of my reading in December, then I've been doing some rereading, and
Yeah.
I kept picking up on things every time I reread the story. And so it reminded me of the story we did several years ago where Oak and Hearts Do Gather.
Yeah.
where you read it and say, okay, this is the story. And you read it again and you go like, oh my gosh, there's an entirely different layer to this story I didn't get the first time.
Yeah.
And that's such an enjoyable experience. It says a lot
Yes.
about the skill of the writer that they employ there. And given that Ray Naylor won a Hugo Award just last year for his
Mhm.
novella, The Tusk of Extinction, says a lot about, him as a writer and his ability.
Yeah.
This is one of the best stories in this magazine, I think.
Yes.
I've been buying Hugo memberships. I may nominate this one and the next story as well for Hugos because I was that impressed by them.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to the next one then, which is Spare Parts for the Mind by Greg Egan, who is 64 years old, Australian writer and mathematician, multiple Hugo and Locus Award nominations over the years, publishing since 1983, probably the big star name in this issue. Would you like to talk us through this one?
Yeah, let me give a brief overview and then let's deep dive into the parts that we want to talk about.
Mm.
Our main character is Gordon and he suffers from severe dementia. And his wife comes to visit him and he starts remembering things. What he used to do for a job, that they have children, that he's retired, what his wife's job used to be. And it turns out that after several years of him being in a memory care facility, that his wife enrolls him in a program which costs $2.5 million to put implants in his brain to help him regulate brain functions. Because it turns out that in his form of dementia, he hasn't lost the memories, he's lost the ability to recall them. And they have been trying to tune his implants in for several weeks, and they finally got the right recipe going. And so he gets to go home from the facility and begin to experience life again. But then other problems start to crop up.
It just occurred to me when you said $2.5 million. That might be Australian dollars because the characters do appear to be Australian based. And of course, the author is Australian. So, according to Google, today, at the time of recording, 2.5 million Australian is 1.74 million US. So,
Still a chunk of change.
not quite as bad, but
Yeah.
yeah. So, what I liked about this one is I think technically this is a novella. So it's the longest story in the issue. And it does read like a novel, I think. It's more than a short story. It sort of occupies a bigger time period and a bigger world in a way than a short story would do. It follows on beautifully from the Ray Naylor story before it, which cannot be coincidence. You can imagine Sheila Williams being ecstatic to find that she has two really good stories about memory and she can put them next to each other. And funnily enough, in the old Asimovs that we read last time, weren't there a couple of stories there that dealt with memory, basically saying that the problem isn't that you haven't remembered, it's that you cannot recall. I'm sure the Asimov story was about that, and there was another story that was about that as well. There's some really nice exploration of issues around the whole business of preserving memory and how memories form your personality. And the classic example of somebody with Alzheimer's is that they can't tell the difference between a real thing and something that they've just imagined. So your behavior can be bizarre because you're acting on something that is false, or it can be apparently rational because you're acting on an actual memory that's come back to you. So it sort of deals with those issues as this character goes through an ongoing deterioration of his condition. And it also deals with the way that behavior can be prompted by memories or suppressed. And there's a really nice bit where he's given these new implants and his family are given these little rings that they can use to feed back on his behavior. So these implants will cause him to change the way he behaves, and they can just, if he does something bad or outrageous or unacceptable, they can just tap the ring, and that will teach the software that that impulse he was just given was inappropriate. And all of this is done in a very deft way. It's not something that Egan spends pages and pages explaining to you. It's just sort of dealt with on the fly, and I found it completely believable, but also highly appropriate to the themes that he's exploring around memory. And then there's stuff in there that I thought I detected some analogues of how we're treating AI in our real world. That simultaneously we've got a kind of a hostility to the way large language models are used. And you and I both have some hostility to that. But there's also a lot of gullibility around large language models and people believing everything that ChatGPT says, even though it's demonstrably making stuff up. So there's some of that there, alongside another thing from our real world, which that there is true AI, which is not based on large language models and which is contributing to breakthroughs in medicine and biology. Even though the story isn't about AI as such, it's got some very strong parallels in there. Do you remember there's a scene where he goes into a diner and they basically say, oh, you can't come in. You've been modified.
Yeah, the diner has scanners around the door.
Yeah, that's right. I forget what they call it. Is it a metalhead or something? You're a metalhead. You can't come in.
Right. These implants, which were originally designed for medical purposes to help people with traumatic brain injuries and dementia, are being used as augments for people to cheat in some cases.
Yeah.
And it even mentions for the very rich, it says that they can do hand-free emojis now. No, when you mentioned, an incredible technology being used for trivial purposes like ChatGPT, that totally reminded me of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he basically talks to the people in the diner and says, hands up if you want me to leave. And one person puts their hand up and then more and more. And eventually a majority of people have put their hand up. And it's sort of this social prejudice where people are not taking the time to understand the real situation that this guy is in and just making a surface judgment. Even though it's not about a thing in our real world, it very much reflects the world in which the author is writing, which I always think makes for a very rich story. It could make the story look very dated in 20, 30 years' time, or it could make the story look as if it's very much of this moment and is kind of capturing a zeitgeist.
I was really struck and moved by, the fact that they find a cure for his dementia in the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And because of the ongoing damage, it turns out he actually has another problem, which only pops up because he can exercise his memory and have volition now.
Yeah.
And so they try treating the secondary problem with medication, but they're so in debt that he had actually gone back to his job as a toy maker and inventor, and on the medication, he couldn't do that. So then they tried a second round of implants, and they told him that there is so much damage that if you use the implants full time, you'll only have 6 months of life.
Yep.
And that's where that whole training thing comes in, where he has this incredible impulsiveness which shows up and gets out of control. And so the rings help dial the system in his head in to say, no, that's too impulsive. And how he learns to deal with that disability then on an ongoing basis. And yeah, the prejudices from people about his implants. That actually reminded me of what's going on now with the bathroom wars for people who are transgender.
Oh, yeah.
That they install the sensors to try and stop people from having a meal in a restaurant with implants. Just seems as silly to me as preventing someone from using a bathroom.
Yeah.
Which is not going to be a popular opinion to share, but...
Nope. Yeah. It's petty, and it comes from irrational fear rather than from anything to do with social justice. So what a very rich story this is. It's dealing with so many things that aren't even about the thing that it's about. I just find that amazing. I don't know about you. I've not read very much Greg Egan before. I think I've perhaps read one story prior to this. But I've heard a lot of people talking about his work. And this really gave me a strong impression. So I definitely want to read some more. Have you read any of his previous stuff?
Not that I remember. I think this is the first thing I read, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So I think the issue ends on a high with those two stories. For me, it started on a low, I think, with a story that was not so impressive. And it's a bit of a roller coaster as we go through the issue. So how does this issue compare with the one from 40 years ago then?
I think off the cuff, I want to say that they're on par with one another.
Yeah.
There were some stories that were incredible. Some stories that were really moving.
Yeah.
Some stories that were just plain out fun. Some things didn't hit well for me, but will probably work just fine for other people.
Yeah. The one thing that is different, obviously, is that Asimov isn't present anymore because he died years ago. But I still felt a sort of an editorial presence in this magazine, which can only come from one thing, really. I mean, there's an editorial at the beginning, but also each story has a paragraph of introduction. which introduces the author and then gives you a hint of what the story is and then gives you the title. A very simple device, but not all magazines do that. A lot of magazines just give you the story and don't introduce them in any way. So there's a little sense there of the editor curating this for you, which I think feels good. But what I miss, and I've said this before, the letters column. There's no letters columns in modern magazines.
There isn't? Did I totally did not.
Well, if there is, I missed it. I'm going back to the table of contents now.
No, you're right.
Nowadays, people feed back through Twitter and Facebook and the official websites, so there's probably no need for a letters column. Plus, the time scale of publication on these. I mean, I think this is just published every 2 months now.
Is.
But Pete wrote to us to say that back in the 80s, they were actually publishing 13 issues a year. So it wasn't a quarterly thing, it wasn't a bi-monthly thing, it was every month plus an extra one. So maybe having a letter column makes more sense when you're publishing on a fast rotation, and it makes less sense when you're only publishing once every 2 months, as they do now.
I wonder how interactive they are on their social media with people that write them notes and everything, because that would be a huge job.
Oh, yeah.
To do that on a regular basis.
Yeah. I did have a quick look at their Facebook presence, and I did see a lot of comments which went unanswered. So, and I think that's typical in modern publishing. People make announcements and they receive comments, but they often don't respond. So I have a feeling that's how this is with Asimov's. But I've only made a cursory look, so I can't condemn them in any way.
Yeah.
Anything else to say on Asimov's?
How do you feel about ranking the stories?
I find it very hard because I sort of read them over such a long time span. I definitely think the Ray Naylor story, Catch a Tiger in the Snow, for me is the most stunning story. It really hooked me on first read and it made me want to reread. So I think that's a very strong piece. Closely followed by the Greg Egan story. The others, I don't know if I would ever go back to them, frankly. I would like to read the Alan Steele, the Lemuria 7, but I'd like to read it as a complete series rather than just as a single. What about you?
You know, I took two approaches to this, and I thought about what did I most enjoy?
Yeah.
And my favorite story from there was Outrun a T-Rex.
Right, yes.
And then I thought about, what is the best?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the best story was Spare Parts for the Mind, followed by Catch a Tiger.
Yeah. So we're agreed on the best two.
Yeah.
And the T-Rex one is a very competent story, but it's just one that I feel I've read that. I don't need to reread that. But there's nothing wrong with it at all. So a bit of a mixed bag. To be honest, if I had picked this issue up randomly and bought it and read it, it's not a strong enough issue to make me want to think I'd buy another issue of this. But the way it's been put together with the stronger pieces at the end, I think is showing very good editorial judgment.
Well, and knowing we're at the end, when I think about leafing through something, I turn to the beginning and I see the first few paragraphs draw me in.
Yes.
I'm not sure if the Because It's Their story would do that for me.
Yeah.
But Spare Parts for the Mind and Catch a Tiger definitely do. So maybe if I'm going to flip through a magazine, I'm going to go to the back and start from there and see what it says.
Yeah, that's probably a good move. Yeah. From that point of view, maybe the one about the T-Rex should have been the first story, because that would have got you in, wouldn't it? It's very clear and it's fun. So I think that would be a good way of drawing people in. Anyway, we're second guessing Sheila Williams now.
Yeah.
She's been at it longer than we have.
And she's a professional.
Yes.
Do you have any past, present, or future items?
I do. I have a past item. I rewatched Battle Beyond the Stars in 4K.
Oh my goodness.
Richard Thomas, John Boy from the Waltons in outer space. All of the extras on there want to make you believe that it's a masterpiece, and it's not a masterpiece, but it's a good, fun little film from the 1980s. In the live action footage, it's got the look of Logan's Run and Star Trek The Next Generation. And in the visual effects, it's got the look of Star Wars. Musically, it's got a James Horner score. probably one of his best scores, but it, at the same time also sounds like Jerry Goldsmith, so it sounds like Star Trek the Motion Picture. So it's got all sorts of influences going on. And the screenwriter, John Sayles, had obviously seen that Star Wars has some references to Kurosawa films because he writes this, which is a retelling of The Seven Samurai, but set in space. So it's a very curious response to Star Wars, but it's not great, but it's fun.
Was that a theatrical movie or was it made for television?
Oh, it was a theatrical movie, yeah. Yeah, it does look a bit TV, and the star of it is a TV star from the time, so yeah, it's sort of understandable that you would think that.
So, back in the olden days, for those of you who are younger, if you didn't see a movie in the theaters, you didn't see a movie. And in an effort to spread the movies wider, the broadcasting systems, at least in the United States, would carry them on usually a Sunday night.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling that I caught it as one of the Sunday night movies.
Yes.
And when they did not rebroadcast a cut down version of a theatrical movie, they were making new movies out of their own studios all the time as part of their content.
Yes.
And now that we have the streaming systems, that whole environment is different.
Yeah. I don't remember when I first saw it. I mean, I never saw it in the cinema, so I must have seen it on TV at some point. But I just noticed it was on 4K and it was cheap and it got good reviews as a piece of 4K product. So I thought I'll have that. I'll have a look, and it's quite good. What have you got?
I have a present item. There is a New Zealand satellite propulsion firm that has come up with a purely electronic way to do small adjustments to the orientation of a satellite. You may wonder why I bring this up, and it's because David Brin, the author, brought it up because it reminded him of a story he wrote in 1983 called Tank Farm Dynamo, which talks about a purely electric way to manipulate satellites in space. So I actually found the short story online and I bought it, and it is a delightful read. It's near-term hard science fiction. It talks about potential other uses for the fuel tanks from the space shuttles, which would have been really contemporary in 1983.
Yeah.
The basic idea is, why would you spend all this fuel getting all this metal up into orbit and then put it back on the planet? Why not leave it there and do things with it?
Yes.
And then other things develop from there. There's a little bit of politics. There's a lot of science. I thought it was a great little short story.
Interesting. I have an item which is either present or extremely past. And what it is, I noticed the other day that this year is the 960th anniversary of 1066, which was the year of the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest, which is basically where this guy comes over from France, invades England, claims the crown, and becomes king. And now it's not science fiction, of course, it's history, but that invasion changed our landscape, it changed our language, it changed our culture, and it's always seemed to me that that must be close to what we often portray in science fiction. In other words, the alien invasion, the takeover. And the other day, I listened to a very accessible series of interviews with Mark Morris, who's a historian who wrote a book called The Norman Conquest. And I found the interviews and his book to be very absorbing. So although it's nothing to do with science fiction, if you're interested in the idea of invasion and one culture taking over another, that may be interesting for people to have a listen to or to have a look at. So I'll put links in the show notes to those.
I have a future event, which is a callback to our earlier episode about Aardman animation. 2026 is the 50th anniversary of Aardman Animation.
Wow.
And this summer at the Bristol Museum's M Shed, they're going to have an exhibit all about Aardman and Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep and everyone else.
Wonderful. Now that's Bristol in England, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. And just making sure you didn't have a Bristol of yours over there somewhere.
I'm sure there's some place called Bristol, but it is nowhere as famous as yours.
Excellent. And then I've got a future/present item, and that is the teaser trailer for All Mankind Season 5 has now dropped, and they've set the date for the premiere of Season 5 to the 27th of March, 2026. So that's me sorted for about 10 weeks when we get to there. I shall enjoy that. Again, links to all of these things in the show notes. Do you have anything else?
Nope, that wraps me up. Thanks for listening.
We're Phil Nichols and Colin Cuskey.
Our music is from Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com.
Please visit our website at 101sf.blogspot.com.
where you can support us by buying us a coffee.
And you can find us on Facebook and Blue Sky. So see you next time.